I'm going to start with some introductions, and hopefully if there are others of you here that could note that in the chat, that would be great. So we can just kind of finalize how we'll take our approach this afternoon. We're glad you're here. My name is Vicki Bates. I'm the Executive Director for Teaching and Learning in Franklin Pierce School District, but most recently I'm really just on day 7. So prior to this, I was Assistant Superintendent for Technology in Auburn School District and was in that role when we submitted this presentation just based on work that we'd really been doing to provide a computer science pathway K-12. And I had the pleasure of working there with a colleague. So let me hand off to her for an introduction.
Yeah, hi, I'm Erica Covey, and I teach elementary computer science at the K-5 level, and then I'm also our teacher leader within the district, helping to create professional development for teachers within computer science, create pathways for all students to get access to computer science, and just support teachers on implementing computer science. So this is just a passion of mine, so I'm happy to be here and share computer science with you.
And I would say that just so that you know, so part of being in a new role, I'm learning, right, all the new technology here. I've gone from Google to being a Microsoft district, and I don't have a webcam yet, so I'm trying to watch the right way here. So I apologize if you find me looking the wrong direction or something along the way. And it's been fun learning this new hop-in tool, so we'll do our best to negotiate that accurately as well. We are making this session as active as possible. We don't, as you know, if you've been in the conference, we don't have breakout rooms per se, but we're going to have times today where we are doing some reading, where we're going to do some responding online in Padlet or in a shared document. And we certainly encourage you to use the chat whenever you have something to add or that you have a question. We're happy to have that ongoing as well. So we'll have you be as busy as possible in the content today. So hello, those of you that have put your title there. I see Amber, Bess, and Ethan. If there are others of you here that would want to indicate who you are, that would be terrific. So I think with this small group, we'll definitely make some accommodations in what our plan was for presenting today as we roll forward. So as we begin, we want to figure out where to be here. So I'm presenting, but nothing's moving forward yet. There we go. So before we move forward, we do want to share this acknowledgement. So in the Auburn School District, we acknowledge that we're on the land of 19 Puget Sound Salish tribes that settled along the shores of the Puget Sound. And we are going to be talking today about how computer science, how this discipline impacts Black, Indigenous persons of color, and how we think about engaging our BIPOC students in this work in our district. So this is an important group, our Indigenous peoples that have been here since time immemorial and continue to live with us today. And we want to be mindful of that as one of the groups we want to be thoughtful about as we move through our work today. We have really 2 objectives that we're going to be working on, a why and a how. So the why is really around, why? Like, why are we talking about equity with computer science? Why does that even matter? And we have some philosophies about that we're going to share with you. And then we're going to switch to focus on the, okay, well, if we're invested in that, then how do we go about thinking about this work at both the systems level and also at the classrooms level to move forward? So we're going to begin with that first objective of our why, and invite you to consider this continuum that's adapted from the University of Toronto's educational activism work in thinking about, what does it mean when we talk about, racial equity or educational justice, kind of where are we? So I'd invite you just for a moment to think relative to this topic of computer science, and we're really thinking about it K-12. Where along this continuum would you place your district's work currently with regard to that topic? And you can share in the chat if you'd like, but don't have to. Really just want you to have a personal reflection for a minute, and we're going to come back to this continuum a little bit later in the presentation. All right, welcome. See another face here. We're happy to have you. All right, so kicking us off, again, we'll come back to that continuum in a bit. For our purposes today, we're just going to use this operational definition, thinking about computer science as computers and computational thinking, helping us solve problems. So it's not that skill-based piece of technology in terms of, keyboarding or how to save things to a drive or how to create, but really leaning into how we think about computers and computational thinking showing up. And how computers are influencing our lives and problems that are around us. So to that end, I want you to think back over like your last week or 2 weeks and just think for a minute about how have computers been helping you solve problems? How is technology showing up for you in your life? So maybe kind of recall, gosh, did I go shopping? Did I go to the doctor's office? Was I at the library? Was I on vacation? Kind of what was going on in the last 2 weeks? And what are some ways that computers were helping you solve problems in those settings? So as you reflect on that, I'd like you to put just 1 or 2 ideas about that in the chat, how computers are showing up for us now in problem solving in our lives. And we'll take a minute to allow people to do that and see what comes up in the chat. Looks like we have a few of you that have just joined us. Welcome. We're happy to have you here. We're just reflecting on how computers and computational thinking are helping us solve problems in our lives. And I just asked the group to put some examples in the chat. So for example, Ethan has kicked us off with one about having a virtual doctor's appointment. So certainly one that probably some of us are experiencing even more of maybe in the last few years than we had previously. Great, there's another one there. Thanks, Erica. What other ways is technology showing up for you and helping you solve some problems in your life? Anything else to add there? Thank you, Beth. I know my family's having that conversation. How are we going to manage our calendars together? Thank you, Amber. Yeah, when we are together and be able to have discussion around this, what we invite people to next think about is as we think about the ways that computers are showing up and helping us solve these problems, who's behind those technologies? Like who created those technologies for us, and does it make a difference on who that is? What are the skills that we think about that we would want people to have? So that's a thought we want you to kind of hold in mind. And I'm noticing there are a few of you, 3 of you that actually talked about impacts in the medical area. And we had in this session once a participant whose husband worked in medicine and was talking about how do we have automated medical pieces be appropriately responsive and not thinking about the work in a gender binary. And that was a really unique piece of work that was coming to them, because so often, we get those medical questions. I think if you go to WebMD, it still asks you that as the first question. Are you female or male? And then routing all that through. So how are we thoughtful about that was a problem that someone in our group had shared with us before. So I want to share with you some other examples of how technology has solved problems before, and maybe who's behind it, or what they, the perspectives that were behind that weren't necessarily creating solutions that worked for everyone. So this picture on the far left is of a tool called a Shirley card. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but in the 90s, 60s, and 70s, these Shirley cards were created in the photography industry in order to process film correctly. So if any of you are as old as me, remember we would take our little cartridges of film from our cameras to the drugstore and turn them in, and they would be developed into photos, and we'd go pick them up and get them back. And this was a measure, this Shirley card was a measure of how the pictures are supposed to look and how they're supposed to turn out, that was used in film developing. But just like this picture, all the Shirley cards were white women. So as a consequence, one of the things we saw in photography for years, and we really do continue to have an impact in that industry, is that folks with darker skin coloring didn't show up accurately in photos. This middle picture is of a crash test dummy, and it's there to remind us that it was not until the year 2011 that the automobile industry was required to use crash test dummies that were sized like a woman. And until that time, women were 50% more likely to be injured in a car crash than a man. So again, what's behind that, technology? Who's creating that, and how are they thinking from broad perspectives? And finally, this picture on the right is just here to remind us of, all that's going on today in artificial intelligence and facial recognition, which we know works less accurately on Black, Indigenous persons of color, and also women. So we're starting to see that. If you listen to NPR, you probably have heard some of those debates and coverage there around that. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more deeply and consider the thinking here. And we're going to do that through an article. So I think Erica's going to pop this link in the chat for us. The article that we're going to read today is Why Algorithms Can Be Racist and Sexist. And we're going to do some reflecting about that on this collaborative document. So the first link you have in the chat is to the article. So you'll want to open that up so that you can access that. And then the second chat, or the second link that we're getting is going to be to a collaborative record that we're going to do some recording on. So just to get us all on track of what we're doing, we're going to give you some time to read the article and to fill in this document that just highlights some pieces that you've read about. So if you would just pick a row, and the first column asks you for, what's an example or examples that are provided by the author of the way in which algorithms are performing with racist or sexist behaviors there. And then the second column, why does the author suggest that's happening? Kind of what's behind that? I think so often we think about technology being neutral, but why is it that it doesn't work out that way? And then any questions or ideas that this raises for you as an equity-minded educator. And I see your little icons popping in there, which is awesome. If you have any trouble getting the article or the document, please just make a note for us in the chat. But otherwise, we're going to be quiet for a bit here and just let you do some reading and some writing about that. So we're going to allow 15 minutes for this task. We'll check in with you just before 3. Might have noticed the article has lots of links in it to the actual stories behind some of the examples. So if you've read through it and you've already written what you want to write, please feel free to just choose one of those links and look into that a little bit further. We may have a couple new people in the room. If so, we're doing some reading right now and making some notes about that. I'm not sure if you can see the existing chat or not. I don't know if anyone can tell us that when you come in new to this session, if it's like Zoom or if you actually see it. Do you know, Erica?
They should be.
Awesome, Ashley. Sorry, Erica, I didn't mean to cut you off. Thanks, Ashley, for that information. That's helpful. So the first link that Erica put in there, the Vox link, we're doing some reading there about bias in algorithms. We're going to join back together as a group in about 4 to 5 minutes. All right, as Anonymous Iguana is writing, please keep going. I just want to comment, thank you, those of you that read and are adding some ideas there. When we have done this work in our district, we've used this or other articles that highlight some of these issues and just to try to use an organizer as a way for people to get into the content. But definitely seeing some examples that are pulled from the piece. And I think probably this last comment is really reflecting, right? When we have individuals who are creating tools and we are inherently in a historically, racist system, that influences all the data and all the experience that's coming right into this work. So definitely see that showing up there. and across all kinds of differences that we think about when we think about diversity and equity. Is there anyone that wanted to speak to the article at all? I think there's a way we can invite you to step onto the stage. We're willing to try it. We're learning this tool with you, but I think there's a way you request that. Ethan, do you know how to people do that?
Yeah, they can request to come up on stage, and then exactly that, you would invite them. And we only have one space left of the 5 spots.
Yeah, so we'd have to do. So we'd have to kick you out after you after you speak. But Ethan, how do they do that request?
So I believe on their moderation panel, I don't know if they see the moderation panel on the bottom left, but that's where they will be able to go if they want to come up.
Okay.
I'm not in the participant view, so I'm not exactly. Let me check. I'm going to check something real quick.
No problem. Well, if anybody sees that and wants to try it and you want to share, please feel free to do that. But we open this with thinking about, how is technology influencing our lives and problems that we're trying to solve? And then who's behind that, and does it matter? So the big takeaway that we're really hoping that we're seeing here is, right, technology isn't neutral, as you're recognizing. And it does matter, and it's pretty difficult. It's kind of scary, I think, when the article talks about, in some ways, there's not a way to school that out or to ensure that technology is going to have the appropriate impact on all groups. So I think that has some pretty big implications for how we think about this technology and the level of transparency that we would want to expect. So what we're, one of the things that's exciting, I think, about this, I noticed there's an idea about that promoting computer science as an accessible pathway for students, and in particularly students who have been previously excluded. And one of the things I think that's really encouraging about that is that we're starting to see data that really shows that when work teams are diverse, they really do produce better products, things that are going to be right, help us solve those problems in ways that have the intended and positive impact and not these unintended other consequences. The book that's labeled in the bottom right is a text that we've used in book studies for professional learning with elementary teachers around computer science and computational thinking. And one of the illustrations that's in the book talks about that one of the ways that patents are kind of evaluated and considered, like what's a really good patent, is how many more patents over the years refer back to and build on that. And in one study where they looked at those trends over 25 years and found that mixed gender teams had 42% higher rates of people building on and using their patents for subsequent innovation than teams that did not have gender diversity in them. So I think, seeing data like that and more studies around this, I think helps to really build this positive case. I don't know if any of you have seen, Erica shared this with me the other night, so I'm just going to grab it and put it in the chat. But there's a commercial that HP is running in the Olympics where they highlight the importance of diverse work groups. So that was kind of fun to see that the other night. So we're not going to play it today, but I'll leave it there for you, and you're welcome to put that in your, in a tab and grab that. Had anybody else seen that come up yet? I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. All right. Well, it's pretty cool to see, and especially in light of what we were talking about today. We want to shift and think about this why, specifically as it shows up in our classrooms. And I think on that far right column, there was at least one comment, right, that was starting to talk about that. And these are some girls at one of our elementary school, and they're learning about creating algorithms by creating dances and dance patterns and writing them into some code there. But we are going to watch a video just thinking about then how are these issues about equity of access and who's involved in computer science showing up in our classrooms. So be thinking about your setting as we show you this as well.
Welcome to AP Computer Science at a high school in San Francisco. If you come visit the class, you'll quickly notice rigorous instruction and a qualified teacher, a class that everybody in the high school should be taking. Unfortunately, if you look around the room, you'll also notice that the school's population is not represented in this class. There are far more males than females, and there are few, if any, students of color. This leads me to wonder, why aren't all students taking this class? What is causing this inequity?
School districts is that it really depends on where you live as to what kind of access you have to courses that involve higher order thinking and problem solving. So in the neighborhoods and schools in low socioeconomic status areas, you'll find that the coursework for kids starting all the way in kindergarten on going up to 12th grade is more intervention work. And it's sad because it doesn't leave them room for anything else. They don't get access to music, they don't get access to art, they definitely don't have access to computer science.
At least for like our beginning challenges, if you were a female versus a male and you were starting the challenge, you had equally likelihood of actually completing the challenge. However, we still have a tendency for more males to be coding in our curriculum than females. So we have about like 66% male and 34% female. And that's interesting because Khan Academy is actually, as a whole, it's about 50-50. So it means that there's still more males that are somehow self-selecting to learn programming on Khan Academy. And, you know, for whatever reason, maybe society makes them think they can, maybe they have more confidence, whatever.
I usually take the view that all girls are underrepresented in computer science. Within that group, there are obviously women who are even more underrepresented. So low-income students, as well as students of color, are vastly underrepresented in the sector.
So when I first saw my roster and I counted how many boys and how many girls were in the class, it was about 70% boys and only 30% girls. I think society as a whole exposes technology to boys at a way younger age, and they get interested in a lot more. Girls are not so much exposed to it.
So for instance, you said that there are computer science classes available at the high school level, but you go into the classroom and the majority of the people in that classroom are male. So they don't sort of see themselves or envision themselves in that role, largely because of what is reflected in the sector, right? So you look inside of Twitter and it's 90% male. It's definitely more difficult for girls to see themselves in that.
I mean, I think it's representative of the greater equity issue around education in general. Like, I don't think there's necessarily like aspects to this that are different. It's just we're continuing to perpetuate the same things. So like, I think that typically schools that are more proactive in getting programs into their school are more proactive about getting computer science into their school. And like places that are able to afford like really nice computer labs for their classrooms are more likely to have it. What bothers me is that because we have this knowledge and because we're at such an early stage, we have an opportunity to have no equity issue. Like if we're just intentional and smart about what we're doing, there's no reason that we can't just be equitable because everything else is there in theory.
So what do you think it would take to change that?
I think the number one thing is just exposure. I think if more teachers did like that hour of code, then the girls would think, oh, this is actually pretty fun and I might want to do more. It's just even that 1 hour, you see the spark of it. If they don't have exposure, they don't know what they're missing. Once you expose them to it, they're more likely to want to try it and go into it more deeply.
Like the approach of like, I am making this service and anybody can use it if they want to is not good enough. That's the problem. Is it like,
if you like have people go out of their way to say like, you know, this is something we want you to do, it's important that you do this, then we can actually reach the 50-50 mark. But if we just rely on people organically selecting themselves to do it, then we can't reach that, right? And sometimes that means actually creating dedicated organizations and clubs for that, right? Because if you create a club that's called Girls Who Code and you're a girl, then you feel like, oh, there's a high likelihood that I belong in that club. But if it's just a coders club, you might doubt yourself.
But if you just like recognize the opportunities when they arise, even if you're not actually doing anything proactive, that helps.
Welcome to AP Computer Science.
All right, let's go back here. Come on. Having a hard time getting myself out of here. Come on.
Be taking.
I don't know if it's because I have a couple screens going here or not. There we go. That's better. Coming over. Thank you. Thank you for your patience with me. This is what that looked like for us in Auburn. So this is something that we are specifically tracking that we would encourage you to track as well when we started in this journey of really trying to be more thoughtful about our computer science pathway is who is engaged. And if you look on the left-hand side, you see over a 3-year period of time. So these are our 3 years pre-COVID data of girls and boys. And you see that we really, we aren't at a place where our participation in our high school computer science classes reflects our student demographics. And so part of why we're really doing this work in elementary, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is that exposure that you heard about in the video, right? Exposure, creating a scenario where younger students can see themselves as computer scientists and having that potential and be interested in this pathway. You'll see that when we look at race by our white and non-white group, that we've had some movement there and are seeing some change. And then on the far right side of this, you see our free and reduced lunch versus non-free and reduced lunch participation, which we are not matching our demographics there. So these are things that we are looking at and would encourage you to as well. The 4% is another problem, I think, in that that's the overall percentage of high school students that are involved in a computer science course. So that's probably another conversation about what our expectations are for how students have an understanding of computer science in our system. So we want to talk a little bit about some key, what we want to think are messages that our students are getting when they're not included in computer science instruction. And Charity Freeman of the University of Illinois, if you've participated in the CSTA work around computer science or any of their professional learning in equity, you might have heard from her. But we really were moved by her question about, what do students learn by what's not in their classrooms? The absence of people, the absence of experience, the absence of certain types of discourse in the classroom. And we think there are really 3 key messages around equity that we have to consider relative to computer science. And the first is, it really tells kids that, computer science is not for you if people like you are not showing up in our classrooms. And when we think about, who is in our school districts today, for us in Kent, Auburn, sorry, where am I today? For us in Auburn, when we think about the white male dominance that exists in computer science today, that's that brown box for us. And we have a lot more students than that, that our district is serving that we want to be thoughtful about. And then really remember that most of our student population belongs to groups that have been historically excluded in the field of computing. And what is our obligation to think about changing that? If we looked at the code.org data around what participation then in jobs looks like for tech, it would take us over a century to get to a point of balanced representation in technology at the rate that we are now. So we have a lot of work to do in this area that we can start on at the school level. A second really key message that we think is important is that we think that by not including students currently excluded, it's really communicating to them that, computer science is really about something about harm that's done to you. It's not something that's empowering for you. It's something that impacts you in a negative way. And I would just invite you any day to go on Google and just search artificial intelligence and equity or bias. And really, there's just are things every day that remind us of the ways that computer science and is being used to really harm traditionally excluded groups. So I just pulled literally on one day as we were finalizing this, some examples that were coming up there, whether it's showing up in criminal justice, it's showing up in housing, it's showing up in healthcare, all of the different sectors of society where we have disproportionate outcomes. Technology is making its way into exacerbating those outcomes. So really remembering that the people that are most impacted by racism and the other isms that are in our society that are now showing up in technology, if we continue at the pace we are now, they're going to be excluded from opportunities to really influence those technologies today. So if this is something that is not familiar to you, we really encourage you to watch the Netflix film Coded Bias that came out this year. It's really exceptional and would be a great professional learning piece for you and colleagues as well. And the third message that we think is important relative to equity is that by not including students in the computer science work, we're really telling them that this financial opportunity is not for you. The financial opportunities for work in computer science, if students choose to want to go that way, are significant. And if we're really committed to addressing things like the racial wealth gap, then we would be mindful of how it is then that we are empowering our students to be able to be part of the access to this. So we know, and this particular slide is from code.org, that there's a really significant earnings in computer science that could be had there. If we look at that on a national scale, computer jobs are the top source of new wages that are in the United States. And if we want to think about Washington State specifically, the average salary for students that come out and are working in computer science is almost twice the average median salary in Washington State at that top number. We have 73% of all job growth in our state is in the STEM field in the current decade that we're in, and we're third in the country in terms of these opportunities for students. So there's so much right here in our own state, opportunity for students that we can provide for them. And I don't know what it's like in your community, but we just recently had this article come out in Auburn that showed what it takes to live in our communities. And in Auburn, the report showed that it would require $36 an hour wage to afford the average rent in Auburn. So that's more than 2 minimum wage incomes. That's significant. So how are we empowering our students to have access to income, and wealth that could be available to them? And finally, in the STEM Washington report, there's a section by county. So we pulled out Seattle-King County because that's where we are, but I would really encourage you to look at that for your area as well. And again, this just reinforces all the opportunity that's available financially, that when we don't really provide these on-ramps to students, we're telling them that, that opportunity is really not for you. So back to that continuum that we showed you earlier, we would argue that if we know all of this, that we're really at this place here on the continuum of having some maybe recognition of these issues, but if we don't respond, then we really are still working against educational justice for students. So just reminding you to think about, where was that spot that you thought you were earlier? I know one of you, I think our CTE director here, was talking about interrupting the behavior. That's awesome that you're already on the positive side of that scale, but really being mindful of, what do we do with this information to really help us move forward in a more just way? So I'm going to stop sharing, I believe, if I can figure this out right, and we're going to switch off here to Erica. All right, I got to get my cursor on the right screen is my problem. There we go. Sorry about that, Erica. It's taking me a minute.
No worries.
And while we're transitioning, if there's anyone that has a comment they want to make on what they've heard or wants to ask to step in and comment or ask any questions, please feel free. Oh, thanks, Ethan. Click the blue button.
All right. Well, I am going to move to the second objective for the day, the how. So now that we know why this is so important, how do we actually, interrupt those behaviors, make those changes? And so the first thing that we need to be aware of is that Washington State actually does have computer science standards for K through 12. So we need to be aware that those exist and that we are applying those standards within the classroom. And then something that Auburn has done to support those standards is we created some learning priorities where we actually pulled resources on how we can teach each of those standards within the classroom, and not just standalone, but integrating them within subject areas. So we'll put I think we're actually going to share this slide, slide deck at the end, and these links will be there, and then you guys can look at them if you would like to. We want to discuss also some systems decisions that your district or you might need to look at when you are implementing some sort of computer science program within your school or district. And the second one is identifying how to deliver it in elementary. So there's several ways that this can be done, and we're actually doing several of the different scenarios in Auburn. We have 5 schools currently that do a specialist model where all students in the school come once a week and get 45 minutes of computer science. And then another model would be where the rest of our schools or classroom teachers are integrating, and goal is 1 hour a week, either doing standalone lessons or embedding them within the science units, and also sometimes it can be embedded into the math units. And there's usually some sort of hybrid between standalone lessons and embedding them within the other lessons. Why is it so important that we start at the elementary level is because statistics show that by first grade, students have already decided if they are good at something, if they could see themselves as a computer scientist. By 3rd grade, they've already decided that computer science isn't for them. So if we introduce it to them in kindergarten and 1st grade, we can hopefully change that gap that we're seeing in our high schools later on, where we're only seeing 4% of our students even taking a computer science course, where we're seeing a much significant lower population of our girls taking computer science. And so that is why we are really hitting the elementary level, is hoping that we change that curve when those kids get up into high school. The next thing for our systems decisions is identifying middle school models. So a couple different ways that we've brainstormed is choice electives, where students can choose that they want to take a computer science class and they're able to do that, or some sort of exploratory model where the students rotate through the different classes that are offered at the middle school, one of them being computer science. And then, of course, you could embed computer science experiences within the other courses that they're taking at the middle school level. This little quote that I put in this slide is actually from the state's guidance document, and we'll also give you a link to that. It's a 125-page document on how to integrate computer science and the laws around computer science. It has a lot of information in it. I highly recommend you checking the guidance document out as well. And then in high school, school districts must approve that AP Computer Science is an equivalent to a high school math or science course. So I believe, Vicki, that's starting next year, school year. So if you're at a high school level, you're hopefully familiar with that, and how are you looking at how you can align that to meet the state's requirements and offering those courses. So lastly, analyzing who is in it and who is benefiting from your CS courses. So like we created the data for Auburn and showing us our girls, our free and reduced lunch, the different ethnicities taking our courses. You can offer those courses, but if you're not looking at the data to see who's actually taking those classes, you're not going to know how you can improve. So make sure you're taking the time to analyze that data and see who is benefiting from those courses is an important step when you're creating equity for your computer science. And then supporting effective classroom practice, which I'm going to go through in a lot more detail here, but you can't just offer the course or tell your teachers to teach this or create a specialist model or do any of those things if we're not also supporting how those teachers can teach those practices. And so,
Erica,
go ahead.
before we go into it's some recommendations around instruction, there are a few questions that came up that you probably be great to speak to.
Oh,
Christy, I'm going to take these in reverse order, but we'll hit them. Christy asked about how you provide your current teachers computer science professional development.
Yes, great question. Sorry, not looking at the chats.
No, it's hard.
So this is our 6th year, going into our 6th year of kind of starting computer science at the elementary level on a more on a bigger level than just individual classroom teachers thinking they're going to teach in their classroom. But we've started with creating what we called Computer Science 101, 102, 103. And 101 is just an intro to computer science, an introduction to the standards, just bringing awareness to computer science and how they could implement it within their classroom. So just bringing that knowledge. And then 102 is our robotics and our manipulatives. So we have 102 is teaching about, we have dash and dot, we have microbits, we have code and go mice. So really getting, allowing your teachers to have those professional development opportunities. We offer teachers to go to code.org classes. And then we have 103, which is this equity course. And then we also have a 201, I believe, which is the computational thinking book study. So that's really how we're doing our professional development right now. And we're constantly changing and adding and to that plan. Was there any
other question, Erica, was around what curriculum that we're using. So when you go to the tab, you'll see that it's really a blend, but Erica might want to speak to that as well.
Yes. So we do not have a curriculum. We use the standards as our guide. We do code.org is free. We use Scratch is free, but we really try to implement that coding, or that the computer science is not coding. And so if you look at the computer science standards in depth, you're going to see that half of the standards are not relevant to coding necessarily. They are talking more about data analysis and the impact that computer science has on the community and things like that. So we're really focusing on computer science as a whole. And so we have not adopted any curriculum, but we use the standards as our guidance. And then we have regular PLCs that our computer science teachers get together and are looking at the data and creating tools to try to, improve what we're seeing from the students. Any other questions, Vicki?
No, not right now. Thank you for taking a minute on those.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys have hopefully, there's so many cute cartoons out there that talk about equity. I just threw this one on there. Equity does not mean equal. I tell my children this all the time that, you know what, if my son wants our house to be equal, I will happily buy him dresses and, and my daughter's in ballroom dance so he can go do everything she does and we'll be equal. Or since he's into music, he can go and do his musical things and his oboe so that we can have the equality in our house where they can both do their own things, or we can be equal and all do the same things. And it's a constant discussion in our house. So I like this cartoon. I have it up to remind my children constantly. We are going to move into our next activity here. I have an article for you to read. It's building equitable computer science classrooms. And so it's an approach for teaching these within the classroom. So what I'm going to have you guys do, it seems like we have 18 people in here now. So hopefully we'll get somebody in each section, but we're going to post this in the chats. And there are different sections within this article. And you'll have to scroll down a little bit, but you will find 4.1, access to rich course content. And if you, let's say your favorite, why am I drawing a blank? Your favorite season is spring, you're going to read 4.1. If it's summer, you'll read 4.2, fall 4.3, winter 4.4. And then you are going to do this collaborative Padlet. And the link is in that, we'll put the link in the chats as well. And in there, if you could, I'll get to it. I had them in order. No. Thought I had it up. I will get it up. There it is. If you could add a response to each column that you read, if you could either, you can choose to explain it to us like we are in kindergarten and you're trying to explain what your section means like you're in kindergarten, or if you could tell us how you could apply this within your school or your classroom or explain it to your teachers. That would be great. You can choose which way you'd want to explain your section in the Padlets. So it takes I'll give you about 5 minutes to read your section and another couple of minutes to add your response. All right, I'm seeing some fantastic responses here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started we'll have a little conversation about the access to rich course content. The fact that it was kind of brought up that computer science is a very abstract concept. So when you're especially teaching it to the elementary level, it's very important that you bring those concepts to their real life experiences, right? And so acting it out, debugging it, getting those kids moving, and not just sitting on the computer is extremely important for them to get comprehension on those skills. And I see like teaching metaphors is another great way to do that. And one thing I always like to say is that even though I'm speaking English and you are speaking English, doesn't mean we're speaking the same language. So when we're using those metaphors to make sure that our English language learners or even, kindergartners haven't been exposed to some things. So making sure that we are explaining the definitions of things and acting it out. The acting it out puts those pieces together. I remember when I taught first grade and I was telling a girl to rinse her paintbrush. We were painting, rinse the paintbrush. And she just kept looking at me. I was clearly speaking a different language, but she didn't understand the word rinse. And it took me a little while to understand that she didn't understand rinse, but then acting it out for her and showing her rinse, those connections then were made. So the acting it out is very important component of teaching computer science for all of our students. And then access to quality instruction. I mean, this is across subject areas. It's just using good classroom technique, believing that all students can learn. I see that posted there. Giving specific feedback, not just saying good job, or do you think you can improve that, or is there another way to do that? Is key to seeing improvement in our kids. And then rich course content and quality instruction is allowing for multiple solutions. We have got to teach our kids that there's not one right way to do something. They come in and they say, oh, 2 + 2 is 4, or A says and they just get into this habit that there's only one right answer to things. And that's not what we're wanting to create when we're sending these kids off to get jobs. We need them to be able to come up with different solutions, and not only coming up with the solution, but maybe also defining what is the problem. Like how can we be innovative and creating new things if we can't identify a problem? Okay. And then let's see, does anybody in access to rich course content or quality instruction want to come on stage and add any additional information or have a comment they'd like to add? I've had a lot of practice this year on my wait time, teaching remotely. All right, well, if at any point you would like to pop on and add something, feel free to do that. When we're doing this class live, we have a lot where we have people, I try to run it just like I do my classroom. We're moving tables, we're having conversations, we're constantly interactive. So this platform of teaching is a little different in this course for us. Let's see, access to identities as computer science. Again, if we're expecting when our kids get into high school that they see themselves as somebody that could take the computer science class, they need to see themselves as computer sciences. And if you think back to those statistics that say in first grade, they've already decided if it's something that they could do or not. So by high school, we have by far miss that opportunity. So with those kindergartners need to see that, hey, not only could I see myself as this, I enjoy this. And I'm not expecting every kid to leave elementary saying, I'm going to be a computer scientist, but everyone should believe that they could be a computer scientist. And so exposing students to, diversity in computer science. I love just talking about the different careers that exist for a computer scientist, because I really, at this point now, cannot think of a career out there that doesn't involve some sort of computer science. Checking out at any store offers self-checkout. I was just actually at the airport, and the little where the Hudson News stores had a self-checkout, and I was just shocked. You walk in and you check out and leave, and nobody was watching over me, which was interesting. But there's really, and then if that machine wasn't working, they had to come over and help fix that machine. And so I can't really think of a career out there that you're not going to need some knowledge of computer science. My son was actually quite upset with me because I talk about the passions and dreams of kids and what they want to be when they grow up. And one of my students really wants to be a truck driver, just like his dad. And I said, that's great. And he's like, but I don't need computer science for that. I just need to drive. And I'm like, well, you're probably going to need a lot of computer science if you want to be able to drive trucks when you grow up. And I told my son that story, and he thought I was just crushing this little kid's dreams. So I was trying not to crush the little kid's dreams, but just making sure he can see himself not only as a truck driver, but also as a computer scientist. And what else I see in here? The most students are able to bring in who they are into the classroom. Absolutely. And that kind of goes on to peer relationships as well. But bringing in what they have from outside of school. A lot of these kids have really rich backgrounds, things that they can provide to the projects that they're working on. And the commercial I saw in the Olympics that we put in the chats earlier actually talks about there's all these people sitting around a room, and you don't really know what the point of it is yet. And then one girl gets up and she puts an idea on a board, and the idea you can't see, and that idea doesn't matter. But the fact is that if you don't bring all these different backgrounds into the room, your ideas are going to be limited. And so if we try to do it in the classroom and make sure that we're opening the door for all of their backgrounds to come in, that they're going to be able to create a lot better projects and be able to see that they are computer scientists and people that look like them are computer scientists. And then access to peer relationships. This is a hard one for me. I struggle with how to pair up kids. I've done it every which way I can imagine, making sure that there's not that hierarchy of students, right? We have the smart students, and then the ones who think they can't do it, or we have the students who are shy and the students that dominate the conversation. So making sure that we're pairing students to try to limit those things that just naturally come about within a classroom. Somebody on here said respect their partners is mutually integral to their respective learning experiences. It absolutely is a lifelong skill, right? Even we're working with our peers, and we need to respect that everyone's going to come to the table with different ideas. And so make sure that we're modeling those peer reactions. A lot of times I will, with my kindergartners especially, I will talk about how we are going to act when we're working in a group, and I will literally kick the trash can across the classroom to show modeling those behaviors of how we can't act. And so I'll say, when we get mad at an idea or our project isn't working, we don't throw a fit, and I'll kick the trash can, and then we'll practice modeling how to correctly listen to each other's ideas and responding to each other's ideas. And something in this article that I really loved is every single day giving an opportunity for the kids to share their backgrounds. Because how are we going to know their backgrounds if we don't listen to them? If we just go right into the instruction, we'll never know that those backgrounds exist. And we may never even know that, hey, maybe one of our students at home already has coded some great app and then they'll want to share it in the class. But if we don't ever ask those questions, we're never going to know those things about those students. So,
Erica, we have Gregory King who has requested to say something. We want to do that. And then we're still seeing the Padlet if you wanted, if there's a time you wanted to switch back to the
thank you. All right,
presentation.
Gregory.
Let's see. I think we've invited you on, Gregory. Hold on here. There we go.
Thank you for coming on, Gregory.
You're welcome. So I'm connected via phone and it's going in and out. Sorry about that.
No worries. What would you like to add?
I'm sorry, I was disconnected.
Oh, were you just reconnecting, or did you want to add something to the conversation?
No, I was connecting.
Oh, great.
Sounds good. Well,
welcome back.
Going in and out, so I apologize.
No worries.
No worries.
We're glad you're here. So, I would recommend going back and reading the other sections on your own time. So you will have the link to that article to read the other sections. The last thing I want to speak to you about is just how to build a culture of excellence around computer science within the classroom at the elementary, middle school, high school level, but also in your building, okay? So you gotta maintain high expectations. I believe if we're wanting these kids to come in and create these computer science projects or whatever it is, if you don't have high expectations of those kids, they probably are not going to live up to those. They're just going to meet mediocre. Wherever you expected them, they will meet there. You definitely have to believe that all students can achieve success. Like I said, I taught first grade. I had a very low reader. She was low in math, a very sweet girl. And then I switched to computer science. And so I was able to have her the rest of her years of elementary. Guess what? In computer science, she was amazing. We were building this card tower, and not only did she make it taller than herself, but she did it faster than the rest of the class. I'm not saying we're trying to do speed or anything like that, but she was successful in this. And this class is the reason she came to school. She didn't come, she knew she wasn't good in the, well, she could be, she didn't think she was good in the other classes, but she knew she was good in computer science, and it kept her coming to school. So believing that all of your students have the capability of being computer scientists, they will start believing in themselves because they see that you are believing in them. Encouraging innovation. These kids got to come up with their own solutions to the problem. If we're just telling them the answer every time, they are not going to be creative. They are not going to be able to know how to be innovative. Emphasizing that there's multiple solutions. A lot of times we will have a project in my classroom where we are trying to solve a world problem. It's a big one I do, where how can we make sure there's enough clean water in the world? And they have to make 2 projects. So because one idea might have some really good things and another idea will have some really good things. And so we'd come up with 2 solutions, and then if we have time, we might meld them to make an even better solution. And so 2 + 2 = 4, but there's lots of other ways to look at that problem. Obviously, communicate effectively, like I talked to the girl with the paintbrush, and make sure we're exposing those students to diversity. They have to see themselves as computer scientists, see their role models as computer scientists. So with that, I'm going to let Vicki take back over.
Great, thank you, Erica. So I'm going to invite you to make some connections in the work that we've been doing. So I'm thinking undoubtedly many of your districts are working on how equity shows up in the instructional frameworks, or you have a culture responsive teaching framework that you're using in your district to think about practice. In the Auburn School District, go back to sharing here. In the Auburn School District, we are using Gary Howard's Deep Equity Framework. And so we look at these 7 principles of culture responsive teaching as a way to have conversation about the classrooms we're working to create. And when we do this work with the staff in our district, we invite them to kind of think about, all right, let's reflect on the ideas that we've talked about today. We've talked about our why of computer science, equity in computer science. We've talked about how from the perspective of thinking about our system, but also with regard to a research article specific to instruction. And we ask people to build some connections to what it is we're trying to be thinking about in this broader way. So I want to invite you to do the same. You can certainly reflect on one of the elements of the 7 that are here, or you can draw from your own experience in your district or your own perspective on how it is you're working on culture responsive teaching. And I'd like you just to put that connection in the chat. So if I were, for example, looking at these 7, one of the ideas we talked about today is how does what we're teaching in computer science reflect our BIPOC students' identity and histories in the work. So I might put there that for element 3, that we really want to make sure that students see themselves as computer scientists, both in our curriculum and in our classroom environment, what we put up, and what kids think about and use there. So I want to invite you just to think about a connection that exists for you as we think about our conversation today and the work that you're doing in your classroom or district around culture responsive practices, culture responsive teaching. So we'll be quiet and just pause for a minute and allow you to reflect and add something to the chat. I apologize if that doesn't make sense or it's too risky a prompt to make that leap at this point. So we'll change our prompt here and give you a different option here to respond to as well. I mentioned earlier Charity Freeman, an educator from the University of Illinois that does work in computer science practices, and just a paraphrase of her, she talks about the complicity often shows up, right, as well. We're reading, we're learning, we're reflecting on these ideas, but those don't really demonstrate action that makes a difference for kids. So how about this prompt instead? As you think about this presentation today, what's been on your mind? What's something that you might identify as an action that would be appropriate for you and your district to move forward with as you think about equitable practices and instruction, equitable systems for students to access computer science instruction? Great, thank you, Thomasina. So she's added here, I was thinking about UDL earlier too. We're talking about the intersection of universal design for learning and culture responsive teaching in our district and really wrestling with that. So absolutely creating those different ways for kids to access the content that we were talking about just in reading that article definitely show up in part of that UDL model for kids to either receive the information or engage with the content. Yeah, great, Eric. Or Ethan, I'm sorry. So Ethan's written there about an action he can take is thinking about computational thinking in the classroom. I think most of us probably are in a district that has some sort of mission statement that talks about preparing all kids, right, for their futures. I really appreciate Erica talking about, whether a student chooses to be a computer scientist or not. I think about we want them to be empowered citizens who can make a difference in their communities and be empowered to make a difference in their own lives, and understanding how this technology is operating around them is definitely part of that. So thank you. Other thoughts on actions that you might take today or ways that this is aligning with other work that you're doing in your district? And again, you're welcome to invite yourself up on the stage if you'd like to talk about that some more too. So we'll leave the chat open, of course. You can continue to think about that. We're nearing the end of our presentation today, so we'll definitely be earlier than the 4:30 mark, which hopefully is a plus for everyone. But We're going to share another video with you now. And this really, when I think about, as leaders, I know this is the leadership strand that you're all here for. And I think one of the things as leaders that we're oftentimes, working through is how do we touch both the heart and the mind of the people that we're working with in order to really engage them in wanting to change and being willing to make a difference and to change. So one of the researchers that you would hear about if you watch the Coded Bias Netflix film, if you probably read some other, she actually was mentioned in the Vox article we read today. If you're reading about facial recognition, you probably would read about Joy Blumwini. But I chose this picture because I first was introduced to Joy in reading about her in Time Magazine, also when she was identified as one of Time Magazine's optimists of the year for that. But what this picture represents is Joy was a doctoral student who was working on problems with facial recognition, problem solving with facial recognition. And she had a problem in that the computer technology would not recognize her face. So one of the things she did in problem solving is created this white mask that would sit over her face, and then the computer recognized her. I think that sits pretty hard in terms of thinking about the issues of equity, right? The keynote address, I appreciate you bringing that up this morning, right? How are kids really seeing themselves? And what are these technologies saying to them about who they are, their identity, their history, their literacy? So this quote is actually out of the Time Magazine that, she, despite her personal experience, still feels optimistic, right? That we can build ethical and inclusive systems that really respect everyone's humanity. And again, she kind of supports this idea that enabling previously excluded communities to actually engage in the development and governments is really a way that we can think about creating better systems. So we're going to watch a little video with Joy. And this video, actually, she isn't talking about this in particular. She's highlighting a particular problem that happens in facial recognition in terms of its lack of accuracy. But she does it in a way, I think, that really brings in an artistic perspective and touches the heart. And I want to just say up front, it's very difficult. So do what you need to do personally. If it becomes too much that you don't want to see it, that's not for you right now, you'll have the link for later and you can turn that off. But I'm going to switch over. I think I'm going to stop and go back because I have the video queued up. And if I don't do that, it will, if I just click it here, it's going to make us sit through the intro again. So let me grab the right tab. Here we go. Oh, you know what? I'm worried that, hold on here. I'm worried I didn't click share audio. So I'm just going to change that real quick one more time just to make sure I did it correctly. I'm definitely doing that teacher think out loud thing. Thank you for hanging in with me. Okay, this will be better, I think. And here we go.
My heart smiles as I bask in their legacies, knowing their lives have altered many destinies. In her eyes, I see my mother's poise. In her face, I glimpse my auntie's grace. In this case of deja vu, a 19th century question comes into view. In a time when Sojourner Truth asks, ain't I a woman? Today we pose this question to new powers, making bets on artificial intelligence, hope towers. The Amazonians peek through windows blocking deep blues as spaces increment scars. Old burns, new urns, collecting data chronicling our past, often forgetting to deal with gender, race, and class. Again I ask, ain't I a woman? Face by face the answers seem uncertain. Young and old, proud icons are dismissed. Can machines ever see my queens as I view them? and machines oversee our grandmothers as we knew them. Ida B. Wells, data science pioneer, hanging facts, stacking stats on the lynching of humanity, teaching truths hidden in data, each entry and omission, a person worthy of respect. Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, the first Black Congresswoman, but not the first to be misunderstood by machines well-versed in data-driven mistakes. Michelle Obama, unabashed and unafraid to wear her crown of history, yet her crown seems a mystery to systems unsure of her hair. A wig, a bouffant, a toupee, maybe not. Are there no words for our braids and our locks? Does relaxed hair and sunny skin make Oprah the first lady? Even for her face well known, some algorithms fault her, echoing sentiments that strong women are men. We laugh, celebrating the successes of our sisters with serena smiles. No label is worthy of our beauty.
I apologize that I missed that cue to mute myself. I hope that you got to hear that. And if we'll have the link again in what we share, which so you can see that again as well. Go back to where we were. Yeah, so as I think about, as I think about Joy's experience and think about, all of our brilliant and beautiful students, right? This is not the outcome. These are not the outcomes that we want, and we want to make that change. So we'd encourage you to hold on to those actions that you identify and continue to think of others that can move you and your systems forward. We do have on the slide here a number of additional readings that we would recommend on here. And again, we're going to give you this deck in just a moment. So several other places that you can read about this work. The Algorithmic Justice League is Joy's project in sight. So there's a lot, there are a lot of resources there as well. We have also on our final slide, our contact information. If we can be of any, resource to you, please let us know when we drop the slide deck in here, which I'm going to try to do momentarily. One of the things that you'll notice is that there are some slides we didn't use today. So when we talk about instruction, we also typically go through some scenarios and do some group work around that. So we did leave those slides in case they might be of use to you, even though we didn't discuss them today. So that is what we have for you. Am I forgetting anything, Erica?
I think we're good, but we do have some time for questions.
Yes. So we are open to questions. Would love to see your other comments in the chat about how you're thinking about, moving forward with this work, any of that. Yeah, I appreciate your post, Thomasina, about vowing to post and publicize role models. I thought Dr. Mohammed's presentation was awesome this morning, and it's really stuck with me all day as well, too, thinking about all of that in this work. So in the presentation that you have, the links should all work on the slides where we had videos. The video is just embedded on the slides, so we hope if you click it, you can see it. But again, if there's something that is not coming up for you or that you can't find, just let us know. I think not seeing any questions here. We'll stick around in case anybody wants to come up onto the stage or put a question in that we can support you with further. But otherwise, really encourage you to take an action to continue to move down that continuum there. And thank you for joining us today. Oh, great. Yeah, it's awesome to think about with a Future Ready initiative. Exactly. As you leave, enjoy your afternoon, and thanks again.